And now, listen to Brats in the Belfry. That was the clock and steeple of the old Moravian church located in Northwood, Pennsylvania. It had struck 12. It was the beginning of a new day. How many times has that clock struck like that? A new day, a new life, a death, the future, the past. It rings it in another time. Let us go back to another time. Let us go back to the year 1863. In 1863, the state of Pennsylvania had unwelcome visitors. It was the first week in July, and the weather was hot and humid. And a man on a gray horse named Traveler led his army into Pennsylvania. And they met at a town called Gettysburg, which everybody knows about now. But sometimes we stop to think about some of our family in that time went to meet these visitors from the South. They were going to give them a warm reception. It was war. Brother fought brother. If you go to Gettysburg today, you will not hear the cannon or the muskets rattling. You will see what was left, the historic spots. You will see the battlefield, but you will not smell the smoke. You will not see the blood, and you will not hear the voices who fought that battle. But what has that got to do with us? Well, all right, men, cease firing. But the battle raged. And from each county in Pennsylvania, and from every northern state, there came troops. Some of them were veterans, and some were rookies. The same for the South. The white whiskered men and the ruddy complexioned youngsters going into battle for what they thought was right. From Northwood came the 153rd Pennsylvania Volunteers. You can read about them in the books. They played their role. Not the biggest part of the battle, but they were there. They fought to survive the Union. I'd like to tell you about one of the fellows that was there. We're going to call him what everybody else did in the 153rd, Company A. He was Brats. He was that young lad who kept the morale up, always had a joke, always could whistle, no matter how hard the task. It was Brats who was there making you laugh. Yes, Brats went into battle, and somehow he loved it. Although his humor was great, he seemed to love to pull that trigger and drop whatever he hit. He noticed that when he used to go deer hunting in the nearby Poconos or out by Jacobsburg, he loved to squeeze that trigger. Although you'd never know it, because he loved life, and he smiled, and he was great to people around him. But he was always up to tricks. And so it was on that day in July in 1863, as the shells dropped around the 153rd, and the rebel army moved forward, and they clashed. Yes, it was a hot day in July, and brother fought brother. That was pretty close, said Brats. Sure was. There's another one. Hey, those boys from Dixie are really throwing some grits at us today. All the boys in the line laughed, the best they could. And and the sweat went down their brows as their guns glistened in the sunlight there in Gettysburg on a July day. The battle got fierce now. They were getting closer. They could make out those green tattered uniforms. The Irishmen from New York with their green. They could look across the field and see the advancing men in gray, their muskets leveled. Soon it would be fire at will. They were getting closer now. They were getting closer. Brats smiled. Charlie alongside him said, "How can you smile at a time like this? This is fun. It's just like hunting up there in Jacobsburg." "Ready, men, ready," said Captain Owen Rice. "Steady, men, steady." And the gray line moved forward. They moved forward. "Steady, men, steady." That was too close. Those shells were dropping all around us. And then it happened. The enemy was on us. We fired. It was hand to hand now. I could see his eyes. I could see his eyes as I pulled the trigger and he dropped. I had killed a rebel. One step to the end of the war. Kill them all, it'll be all over. Kill them all, it'll be all over. Then he heard men cry and scream and drop and blood. He saw the officer on the horse on the gray line topple and fall. And then he saw the young rebel coming at him. And he felt the pain as it hit above his knee. And he fired, and the rebel stopped, dropped his gun, and lay forward. They were closing in now. "Retreat, men, retreat," said Captain Owen. Brats struck his left leg. It hurt, it stung. And then another bullet hit him in the right leg. And he still managed to stumble forward. Charlie grabbed him by the arm. They were dragging him, Charlie and Dutch on the other side. Brats, their hero, their little mascot. He had been hit. And it hurt, and he wanted to cry, but he smiled. And he said, "Darn bees out here in Gettysburg, they sure do sting." "Oh, shut up," said Charlie. "Shut up," said Dutch. And the shells began to fall, and those rebels got closer. We were running now. We were running. Just like at Chancellorsville. "Damn it, damn it, damn it, must we always run?" said Dutch. "No, we're going to stop. We'll stop. We'll fight." They made their way to a high hill and around a building. Dutch set Brats against the building. The pain really hurt. He could see the blood running down both legs. Brats hurt, and he kept smiling. They set Brats against a tree, and Dutch took out his knife and cut his trouser leg. About an inch or two above the left kneecap was a solid hole right through, and the blood came through. He took his hanky and tied it around it and tried to plug it up the best he could. Brats just about passed out from the pain. Dutch cut his other pants leg, and the other hole in the other leg was almost identical to the same spot. "I'll say one thing for you, Brats. When you get wounded, you sure make a nice, neat job out of it." And they tried to plug up the hole and stop the bleeding. Captain Owen, trying to move the troops forward to get away from that gray line as they were sweeping into the town of Gettysburg, said, "Come on, boys. Let the wounded hear." "Goodbye," said Brats. "I'll see you. Take it easy, old buddy." And they had to leave. They followed, and Brats was there alone on that hot day in July, and the battle raged about him as the Federal line fell back and the gray line advanced. Brats laid there alone, looking all around him. There were other troopers laying there too. Some of them did not move. They were quiet. They were dead. And then he saw the first gray line come by, and he saw the three men walk over to him. "Well, well, howdy, Yank. See you got bitten by our hornets." "Sure did, and they really are some stingers you guys have there." They laughed. The one fellow looked down and said, "Here, boy." And he gave him a plug of tobacco. "You ain't look like you're old enough to chaw on this, but go ahead, it'll help you. Thanks a lot." That was the enemy. They seemed nice. They kept on moving, chasing what was left of the 153rd through the town. Yeah, looked like the battle was over for Brats, and the shells began to fall. It was a July day, and it was 1863. It was a hot time in Gettysburg this day. After several hours, Brats noticed that the bleeding stopped in both legs. He managed to struggle to get up, and he took his rifle and used it as a crutch. Against the wall was an old rake, and he used that for the other side. A rebel came up to him and said, "Son, I think the Reformed church down the street there is a hospital. If you want to make your way over there, they can take care of you." "Thank you, sir." He said "sir" to a rebel soldier. It wasn't too bad. These guys were pretty nice. They respected men who had fought and had wounds. Well, Brats, with his makeshift crutches, made it to the steps of the Reformed church. He saw people being carried in on litters. And then he walked inside the old Reformed church, this church of God, and the sight that hit him and the sounds made him feel worse than the wounds that were in both legs. Up front, by the altar, lay the tables where the surgeons were busy operating. The church was full that day, but not of worshipers. They were full of wounded and dying. Brats was exhausted by the time he got there, so he made his way to a seat in the rear and sat there and watched what was going on, this beehive of misery. The day had quickly vanished, and now it was twilight. The air inside the Reformed church in Gettysburg was hot and humid, mixed with the smell of blood, chloroform, moans and screams. Oh, how can a church of God become a place like this? But I guess that's what war does. It respects no place. Again, Brad looked down at his legs. The bleeding had stopped now. Wasn't it something? The bullet hole in each leg, almost at identical spots, just like a tailor had put the cuffs on his pants to exact measurements. While he sat there, Brats looked around, and being keen of eye, he noticed that almost everyone who had the same type of wound he had was placed on a stretcher and taken up front and laid on that table. And then he noticed something that put a chill up his spine. The legs came off, and the arms. And Brats made up his mind then and there that would not happen to him. He wanted to run from there, but he knew the condition of his legs, he could not make it. He wanted fresh air. He wanted to breathe. He wanted life, but not that way. They would not do that to him. As the moans and screams continued in that house of worship, Brats made up his mind. In his mind, he pictured the Belfry, where the bell rang and told the people of Gettysburg, "Come to church today, come to church today." He would go up to the Belfry, and there he would sit and meet his Maker. No, they would not do to him what they had done to others. He would go out of life a whole man. No one paid much attention to him because he was sitting upright. The medics ran by, those attending the wounded. He made his way to the steps that went to the second floor. Each step up was like lightning hit him. He made his way up to the second floor, and there he saw the tiny, tiny steps that went to the Belfry. He would die. He would die in the clean air. He would die looking at the sky. He could feel the moisture again run. The exertion of going up steps had opened the wounds. But he would die a man. After an hour, he made it to the top. And there was a bench on top of the Belfry. And there in the darkness, in that cool air, which was not that cool, but anything was cool compared to the stifling effect of that room downstairs, that room of misery. Those moans, the smell, the screams. And he breathed deep. It was a dark night, and the smell of gun smoke was all over. Occasionally, a musket. He looked and could see for miles. Campfires. The warriors were eating, and now they were going to sleep. He would hear bugles. Tomorrow would be another day. The second day was almost over at Gettysburg, and he sat there on the Belfry alone. He felt bad now. He was thirsty, he was hungry, and his legs hurt. He felt warm and hot, even though he was sitting out in the fresh air. And there on that belfry, on top of the Reformed church in Gettysburg, the boy Brats fell into a deep sleep, exhausted, and the fever began to burn. The night passed swiftly, and as the first rays of light hit him, he awoke startled to hear movement all around him. The armies were up now. The gray, the dirty gray, and the bruised blue. Dust, thirsty, hungry, but they had slept those few hours. They were now ready for another day, a day to kill or be killed. The sides formed. The bugles blasted. The cannons were not yet fired. They should breakfast first. And then as the rays of the sun grew brighter, the battle would begin, that third day in Gettysburg. And Brats, the boy from Northwood, Pennsylvania, sat in the belfry looking at the play before him. He could hear the drum and the fife from the Federal side. New replacements coming in from the north, rushed there. Fresh fodder. Yankee Doodle. He loved the music, even though he felt bad. It was good to hear the tune. It was good to hear the tune. Yes, a new day, new faces. War is funny. We serenade each other before we die. The tribute to relax the body. All's well, all's well. Listen to the fife, listen to the drum. Don't worry, death will not come. From the other side came their song. Look away. Brats's head hurt very bad, but he was so excited what was going on all around him. This grand view he had from the church, this grand view of a battle. He relaxed now. He noticed that the bleeding in both legs had stopped, but the pain was terrific. But the sights below him kept his mind off of it. Down below he saw men in gray, and they were excited. They found 2 big barrels of Pennsylvania whiskey. They called each other, "Hey, buddy, look a here, fellas." And they came running. Although it was morning, the cups were out, and the whiskey flowed. The men drank. They drank and drank and drank. That gray line, which soon would be formed. Yes, for breakfast, they had Pennsylvania lightning. Brats wished he had some, too, because he liked to drink. They called him Brats because he was always up to something. He liked to tease the girls, he liked to kiss them, and he liked to drink his booze. He wasn't that much. In fact, this was the first time he was in church for a long, long time. Yes, he would have to mend his ways. He would have to mend his ways when this was all over. And down below, the men drank the whiskey, and they shouted and laughed with glee. What a find this was. It was good, even though it was Pennsylvania whiskey. Not as good as what we have in the South, though, I could hear. And they drank the barrels dry. And then as time went by, these same men who drank were called by their sergeants, and they formed their lines. And from the belfry, Brats could see the long line of gray forming to advance. Historians will call this Pickett's charge. And Brats will be sitting there watching what happened. They moved forward. The band played Dixie, and that line, in perfect step, moved across that field like they were on parade, the parade of death. Pickett made his charge. And as they advanced, the cannons opened up, and the lines fell apart. That magnificent line of gray. Brats wondered how they could walk so straight after all that whiskey. They kept in step. They moved forward. The shelling, the firing, The battle was now in high gear. Yes, he saw that line of gray, and it was wiped away in no time. He could not believe how men could walk so solid into the face of death without retreating. It was the South's finest hour, but they lost many sons. And then it was over. What was left straggled back, and quiet fell across the battlefield. Only the smell of the smoke and the crying of the wounded. The day at Gettysburg had finished. Down below, the hospital in the sanctuary was busy. Up above in that belfry sat the boy from Pennsylvania. The boy who was waiting to die. His wounds were now bleeding again, and he would let them bleed because they would not make him what they wanted to. Brats sat alone in the belfry, waiting to go. He hungered, he thirsted, and his head was very hot. How long would it be before he would see the gates of heaven? And then he looked up and saw a man standing there in front of him as twilight on that hot July day surrounded them. "Are you thirsty, my son?" said the man. "Yes." And a cup was put to his mouth. The clear, cold liquid went down. "Do you hunger, my son?" "Yes," he said to the strange, kind man. He could not make him out too good because his eyes were now getting blurry from the fever in his body. He ate the bread. "I only have bread, but that is the staff of life, is it not, my son?" He did not answer. Brats continued to eat the bread. It was the greatest thing he ever tasted. "Why are you here, my son?" "I'm here to die. I'm not going to let them do to me what they do to others. I'm here to die." "You will not die." "I'm going to, and I don't want to live without my legs." "Have you ever heard of praying, my boy?" "Yes, I've heard of praying." "Then do it, because it will refresh you like that water did and like the bread. Try it. Try it." And the brats looked as the man went down the ladder. Who was he? He was kind. There was something odd about him. He was different from other men. Who was he? Brats decided to pray, something he had not done for a long time. How would he ask? How would he ask? Brats prayed the way a comical young lad would. He said, "Sir, I'm in trouble, and I haven't talked to you for a long time, and I know you're pretty busy, but I sure would like to go back to Northwood, and I promise, if you heal me, I'll be a new man." "Well, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir." And Brat's head dropped and he fell asleep. It had been a long day in Gettysburg, and he needed sleep. Brats had prayed. "What are you doing here?" Brats jumped up. It was morning and the sun was out, and there was an officer who stuck his head up. He was a Union officer. The Federal troops were back in control of the town. "I'm resting my wounds, sir." "Your wounds? What wounds?" "Here, sir." And he pulled the trouser legs apart, and they were healed. There were scars, and they were healed. How did this happen? Yesterday they were raw and bleeding, and today, like a surgeon's, had closed them up. And what was odd about it, the scar on each leg was shaped like a cross. Above each knee was the sign of the cross. "Those are not new wounds. Get down there, you. I hate men like you. Get down there." And Brats went down the ladder, down to the second floor, down through the hospital, followed by the officer. He turned him over to a sergeant and said, "Get this man back to his unit. He deserted in the battle. We'll take care of him." "But I tell you I was wounded," said Brats. "Move out, move out." They found the 153rd, and he was turned over to Captain Rice. He was happy to see that not too many men had been killed. "Where you been, Brats?" said Captain Owens. He knew Brats. "I was wounded, sir." The sergeant looked at him and laughed. "Yeah, look at these wounds." They looked down at his torn trousers, and they saw the two cross marks above the knee. "These are old injuries." "He wasn't wounded." "Well, he's yours," and he left. Captain Owens said, "Brats, I didn't think you'd run away when we had trouble." "But I didn't, sir. I was wounded." "Well, Brats, where?" "Right here, by the knee. I don't know how it happened, but I was wounded." Brats was trying to convince him, and then Dutch and Charlie come over and said, "Sir, he was wounded, because we used our handkerchiefs to wrap up the wounds." The miracle that happened. The miracle in the Belfry. You will not find this in the history books, but it happened. And in Northwood, Pennsylvania, after the war, one of the finest Christian men lived the rest of his life. And when he prayed, he always bowed. His knees with the two crosses above him. This was a miracle. The story you just heard is the story of Reuben Rook, who was with the 153rd Pennsylvania Volunteers. He did climb those stairs in the Reformed Church in Gettysburg, and when you visit Gettysburg again sometime, look up the Reformed Church. It's now called Trinity United Church of Christ. From the Belfry, you can see where Pickett's made his charge. And then stop and think about this story, because you were there. You were with a young man who saw the battle and saw the hand of the Lord. Hello, this is Jack Kennedy. We sure hope that you like the story of Brats in the Belfry, and I'd like to tell you a little bit more about it. Now, The story you just heard is a true story. It is the story of Reuben Rook. And Reuben was a member of the 153rd Pennsylvania Volunteers. He did fight in the Battle of Gettysburg. He was wounded in both legs, and he sat in that belfry and watched Pickett's charge. He came down out of that belfry. He didn't lose his legs. After the battle was over, he and a lot of other wounded men were put on a train and sent to Philadelphia. Once they reached Philly, they were transferred to another train and sent to a hospital near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. After several weeks of recuperation, he was put on a train and sent east. He was coming back to the Lehigh Valley. On that train were over 200 men. They were also going home. Now, when Reuben's train would reach Allentown Junction, Reuben would have to transfer to a northbound train, which would take him 6 miles above Allentown Junction. He needed something like, it must have been 10 or 11 cents. My memory escapes me. He didn't have any money. He told a young officer on the train that he certainly couldn't walk the 6 miles on the crutches. And the young man went through the cars on that train heading east. And out of 200 men, they scraped together enough pennies to get the fare for Reuben to get on the northbound train. Well, Reuben got on the northbound train, and when he pulled into his station, he hobbled off on his crutches. Standing there on the platform stood his mother and his sister and an uncle. The uncle was going to Philadelphia that day. They did not know that Reuben was coming home. He got off and they didn't recognize him. They didn't recognize the young farm boy who had left to fight for his country. After he yelled to him, there was a joyful reunion on that platform. And then the story of Reuben Rook fades away. I often like to know what happened to the young lad, the lad we heard about. And one reason we made this recording is we're hoping that someday, some person in the future will pick up this recording and listen to the story of Brats and the Belfry. And then maybe his curiosity, or hers, will be stirred to look back in the books and think about the people of those days. We didn't talk about strategy. We didn't talk about this army going this way and that army going that way and the outcome. We talked about a human being and his faith. And we're hoping when that young person listens to this recording, we still have the great and glorious country that they fought for in every war, and thought about the families that waited at home, because that's what it's all about. Now, we talk about the town of Northwood, Pennsylvania. Northwood is a fictional town. It's really the town of Nazareth that we're talking about, because the 153rd Pennsylvania Volunteers, Company A, came from Nazareth area. In fact, they were discharged right there in front of the old Moravian church, right off Center Square where that cannon points south. We used Northwood because we want all you listeners to this story to think you are part of the hometown of Northwood. We know you all can't come from Nazareth, but we'll share Northwood with you. So we're all Northwoodians, right? Well, anyway, if you ever come to Nazareth, your new hometown, and come up Main Street, you'll come to Center Square. And there you'll see a cannon pointing south. I'd just like to say a little poem, and then we'll say goodbye. The cannon points south in the circle at Center Square. It is never fired, but you know it stands silently there. It is warmed by the sun and moistened by the snows and rain, and it listens as the church steeple clock tells of time's change. In my life of travels here and there has been many a time that I wish I was standing there alongside of that cannon in Center Square. Well, until the next time, we hope life is full of happiness for you, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you here in Northwood, alongside of that cannon that points south. Goodbye.